Bum bum bottom 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 bum bum
doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da da da
You are now in session with the Comic Book Couples Counseling Podcast. I'm Lisa Gullickson.
And I'm Brad Gullickson.
And each month we evaluate a different iconic romance within the four-color realm. And in this episode, the accountancy division is the home of very bad things in our Creator Corner. We're talking to Rob Williams and Arthur Wyatt about Judge Dredd, A Better World from 2000 AD.
Yeah, so Lisa and I are feeling pretty darn good. We just booked our hotel and we've started our travel plans regarding San Diego Comic-Con. As you may have seen on our socials, Lisa and I are doing a comic shop road trip.
That's right, people. We are going for the world record of the longest comic book store crawl. Don't check our work because we've done no research on that. But we are driving lengthwise across the entire United States from Virginia all the way to California, stopping at comic book stores along the way.
Yeah.
It's going to be so fun.
We are going to launch on July 12th, and our plan is to arrive in San Diego 10 days later on July 22nd. We're going to have a launch party in Winchester, Virginia at Four Color Fantasies. They're the shop that sponsors all of our Alamo Drafthouse Comic Book Film Club screenings. And yeah, we don't quite know which shops we're going to hit. We would love to hear from you which shops you would like for us to travel to and shop from.
Yeah, 10 days is not like infinite time. We want to definitely hit your favorite places that are worthwhile, who are doing something different, something fun, something creative in the comic book retail space.
Yeah, and I think we would also like to talk to some of those retail managers, those retail owners as well. So it would be great to find people who are willing to go on the record, the way that folks like Eric from Four Color Fantasies have been doing on Support Your Local Comic Shop, our side quest podcast series over on our Patreon.
And of course, if we see some of your faces, the regular listeners, that would also be great.
Yeah, I would really be extremely surprised and tickled and delighted.
Yeah, and we'll be leaving stickers and all kinds of stuff. We're going to make it fun and festive.
Yeah, we know we want to go to the Superman Museum in Metropolis, so we're heading in that direction. We have always dreamed of going to Mile High Comics in Colorado. Mm-hmm. So, there's a brief sketch of a map for you. So if you're living in, Alaska, we're not going to hit up Bosco's in Anchorage. One day we want to go to Bosco's, but it's not going to be on this trip.
We want to hit that planning sweet spot where we have kind of benchmarks of places that we want to hit, but we want to leave room for surprises too. We have wandering spirits.
Yeah, so the way we're doing this is, one, we're renting a car.
Yeah.
Because the car we're currently driving already has 200,000 miles on it, and it's not going to make it across the country, friends.
We don't want a fun mishap story.
And then we're going to fly one way back after San Diego Comic-Con, and that flight actually wasn't terribly expensive. But overall, that means we've got campgrounds to pay for, hotels. It's going to be pricey.
Hence, we are still looking for sponsors.
Yes. And thankfully, we sent out our bat signal looking for people to sponsor this comic shop road trip, and people have already responded. And you're going to hear from some of our new sponsors in this very episode. Beyond the Cape podcast, as well as 2000 AD itself. The publisher actually reached out to us after seeing our social post and bought 3 months worth of sponsorship. And it's actually just a coincidence that their sponsorship starts on this episode. This conversation you're about to hear with Rob Williams and Arthur Wyatt was actually recorded over a month ago.
Which just goes to show that everything just kind of works out, right? rough sketch of a plan and wandering spirits, and here we are.
Does everything work out, Lisa? We are about to talk about Judge Dredd, A Better World, and we're going to talk about Judge Dredd living in the world we're currently living in, and considering if things just always work out.
I don't know. Well, I mean, I guess if you're going that direction, this planet is eventually going to explode, and I'm sure everything after that is going to be fine.
Well, this is not the first time that we've talked about Judge Dredd on this podcast. Rob Williams joined us a few years ago to discuss his End of Days arc on Judge Dredd, and now he's back. And it's interesting to consider my own emotional state today versus when we had Rob on originally.
Meaning, like, Judge Dredd becomes less hypothetical all of the time.
We're getting closer and closer to Judge Dredd and Mega City 1 and being residents within it. And reading Judge Dredd, A Better World, I mean, we were reading it together on the same day, and we were having these, like, deep sighs, like,
yeah.
Lisa would be in one corner of the apartment sighing, and then I would echo back that sigh. And it got us thinking about, what is the point of dystopian fiction?
I think that's a really important question because, like, a lot of the times it leaves us feeling really hopeless. Like you think about, like, the Brene Brown concept of hopelessness, hope being a cognitive process. In order to have hope, you need some sense of, like, okay, here is a plan of action in order to make change.
Right.
But I feel like the function of dystopian fiction is kind of threefold. The first and most obvious being, like, it's supposed to be a cautionary tale. You think about Fahrenheit 451 or 1984. Like, you're supposed to read that and go, like, let's not let it come to this. I think in the present political state we are, like, it's getting too dangerously close.
I agree that it feels like it can operate as a cautionary tale. It's also a mirror and exaggeration of where you currently are.
Right. It's supposed to be an extrapolation.
Yeah, but definitely a warning.
Yeah, an extrapolation of the present, I mean. The second one, I think, is to challenge us to think, like, okay, if I was in this situation, would I be able to function? So for a good example for that are, like, zombie apocalypses. You think about, like, Walking Dead or whatever.
Yeah, Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead. Yeah, I'm in that mall. Is this the monster I'm going to be?
Am I going to live up to my principles, or is that survival monster going to take over?
Yeah.
And then the third one is the one that we talk about all of the time, the Boots Riley thing.
Yes.
This is an idea that we got watching a Q&A with Boots Riley about Sorry to Bother You, which is a great corporate cautionary tale, by the way. You totally need to see it. I think that it is one of my all-time favorite movies.
It's a great film, and I feel like it has sort of faded away in the last few years. You don't hear people still talking about it, and I think that's a real shame. Maybe that's because, Armie Hammer is the face of so much of that corporate evil, but still works, guys.
Super evocative. I think even more prescient, I suppose. But the concept is, like, political fiction, dystopian fiction is supposed to act as a rallying cry. It doesn't exist to change people's minds, but rather to attract like-minded people so that we can organize.
And the conversation you're about to hear with Arthur and Rob, it actually starts with us discussing the plot details of Judge Dredd, A Better World. So I don't think we need to retread or pre-tread those plot mechanics right now. Anyone can pick up Judge Dredd, A Better World and enjoy it, whether they've read a previous 2000 AD title or not. All you need to know is that Mega City 1 is America taken to its most fascistic extreme. And there is a character called Judge Maitland who was introduced by Al Ewing and Nick Dyer back in 2012. And she's from accounts, and what you see in this story from Rob and Arthur is that she has discovered that she can abolish crime by simply reallocating resources, and that goes against the system. Abolish crime, that's impossible.
And she's not buying SWAT suits and souped up cop cars. She is paying for children's education and social services.
Yeah, what a concept. But then where this conversation goes after that is into this territory of dystopian's purpose. And that's my favorite section of this conversation, and talking about, how a light reading of Judge Dredd can take readers into some even darker places.
All of that being said, this is a really fun book. Like, at its core, Judge Dredd is a commentary and a dark comedy. And sometimes, you know us. Yeah. We love talking about themes and we make things not fun.
Don't make apologies for it, Lisa. Embrace what comic book couples counseling is. Yes, Judge Dredd is a blast of a comic, but even that struggle that you're having right now in this moment is addressed in this conversation with Arthur and Rob.
So before we bring these two into our love nest, we need to take a break to hear from our first sponsor. Ooh, I like the sound of that.
Hi friends, if you enjoy comic book couples counseling, then undoubtedly you'd enjoy the Beyond the Cape podcast. They are a laid-back talk show in which every episode highlights their love of this beautiful comics medium, their own personal journey with it, and the journey of the respective artists they feature on each episode. This June will mark their second anniversary, which we certainly recognize as a massive accomplishment. So be sure to follow them on Instagram at Beyond the Cape Podcast, and follow them on Spotify with the Uncensored Nerds Network. Now let's get back to the rest of our show. Awesome. Thanks again for Beyond the Cape Podcast for being the first sponsor of our comic shop road trip. Working these into the show is like a new thing, and finding the right places for them is like challenging and kind of fun too.
So the table has been set. We are ready for the body of this episode. So Judge Dredd, A Better World is available in hardcover and paperback. You can read it before you listen, but you don't really need to. We don't really spoil anything. So you can just roll right into it with Rob and Arthur.
Rob, welcome back to Comic Book Couples Counseling.
Hey guys, thank you very much for having me back.
Arthur, welcome to Comic Book Couples Counseling.
Hello, first time here.
Yeah. Judge Dredd, A Better World. When I first read this, Steve sent us the chapters all collected as a PDF for critics to read. And, I grew up a Judge Dredd fan, and I thought I had experienced like every kind of Judge Dredd story. And obviously I've read your stories before this one, but this one hit different. And it hit different because maybe I'm in a different place at a different time than when I started reading Judge Dredd, and it feels a heck of a lot more relevant to me now than it ever has before. But also the fact that this is a story about someone in Mega City 1 who has cracked the code and figured out a way to make Mega City 1 a safer place. That is so transgressive, even within the most transgressive comic. How did we get here?
Well, I mean, first of all, we should say there's a character called Judge Maitland who's existed in the Judge Dredd world for several years now. She was co-created by Al Ewing. I forget which artist. And Judge Maitland is a good judge, and she wants to do the right thing. But she's also an accounts judge. So we, as we've said before, accountancy is where all the good comics come from, basically. That's where thrill power comes from. So Arthur and I ran a number of stories where Judge Maitland basically we were building up to what was going to be a better world, where Judge Maitland looks at some modeling software, and she sees that if she takes money away from fighting a war on the streets of Mega City 1 every single day and puts it into education and social projects, crime levels go down. And the moment she finds that out, you can't put the genie back in the bottle, because then she goes to the chief judge and she sort of gives her evidence. Judge says, you can have one sector to trial this. Arthur, do you want to carry this on?
Yeah, I mean, I would add that, she's kind of the accounts division equivalent of Judge Dredd. When it comes to numbers, she is uncompromising. She sees what is the thing to do and will do it. And so she hits on this thing, which is, essentially heresy. It kind of flips the model of of how people understand the city, which, generally the premise of Judge Dredd is like this city is a horrible crimescape and completely terrible, and therefore needs the judges and the most authoritarian and badass police force ever. She kind of flips the model on that, and it's like, okay, maybe this place is unforgiving hellscape because we've invested everything in the authoritarian police force that's the most badasses ever, which it changes everything. And because she's this sort of Judge Dredd incorruptible character who won't back down from something like that and will follow through with the implications of something like that, it's going to ruin her life. And but she's not going to back down, and she's going to push the project as far as she can.
And it's like from that point on, vested interests of power within Megacity One aren't going to be very happy about it, and suddenly she becomes a target for not just certain ambitious people within the judges. There's some judges who are just genuinely angry that she's taking their defense, their weaponry away from them when it's a war on the streets every day. But also we have a media mogul character called Robert Glenn, who basically runs Glenn News, which in no way is a mirror for something like Fox News, not in the slightest. And he basically sees an opportunity to use Maitland's experiment as a way to sort of make people afraid and angry. And every time he does that, he pushes those buttons, his share price goes up. And it just so happens that the cost for that are riots on the streets of Megacity One.
To me, the most fascinating thing, not the most fascinating thing, but like something that makes me curious is Judge Dredd's reaction to Maitland's proposal. He is results driven to a certain degree, but at the same time, he is a gun-toting whack job to a certain degree, respect given, whose existence kind of depends on things staying the same. So like I find him in this really weird place where he is supporting Maitland, but still experiencing some cognitive dissonance with the way he's been indoctrinated, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dredd's character really plays into this in a really kind of fascinating way. Like in like D&D terms, he's like somewhere between lawful neutral and lawful evil, depending on if what writer is writing that week. Like definitely when Wagner's in him, he's way towards neutral. When Alan Grant, bless his memory, was writing him, definitely more towards the evil. But he's got this sort of lawful streak that means he will do things that he sees are right for the city, to defend the city no matter what, without compromise. So if something comes along that tells him this person has a thing that will fix things, and he trusts that person, and we've put him through enough adventures with Maitland that he trusts her implicitly, and without that bond, this story would not be there. He is kind of duty-bound to at least try this and defend this from anything that tries to put it off its course, that deviates from that lawfulness that he sees himself as upholding.
Yeah, and he's I think he's not a big picture thinker. He never has been. But I think he trusts, as Arthur says, he trusts Maitland. I think he's also an important factor in my head writing this is just this is old man Dredd we're dealing with here.
Right.
And I think he's been fighting a war for a long time. And Maitland kind of goes, maybe we can tweak it. And he basically thinks, because he trusts Maitland, I think he goes, and he realizes Maitland's a lot smarter than him, I think, as well. And he goes, okay, well, maybe. So his trust is in Maitland. So he goes, well, let's try it. I don't think he's coming into this with any kind of strong sort of political opinion one way. I'm not entirely sure Dredd does a political opinion, really, to be honest with you. He is the law, and that's it. And he trusts his gut, I think, and all these things play into it. So, but as the story progresses, he gets kind of pulled in a very investigative way. There's a killer on the streets, and he's trying to track the killer down, and it kind of leaves him away from making the big picture decisions, which he's never been the chief judge. He is not a politician, and the story plays out in a way which kind of shows, in a way, his strengths and his limitations, I think.
And it's a very multi-thread story as well. So it kind of bounces him through a couple of things. And in the end, everything is kind of joined and ties up. But a couple of times he'll be going down one track and you'll be seeing another track as the situation in Sector 304 develops. And you're wondering, how is this going to come together in the end?
One of the most selfish things you guys did in the telling of this story is closing the door on Judge Dredd talking to the council, because it was his influence, apparently, that caused the council to do this 1 sector, 1 year experiment. And it just makes me curious, like, what did Judge Dredd say? How would he contextualize the solution that Maitland came up with?
Yeah, I mean, we had I don't know if it would be in the material you saw, but there in the graphic novel, there's one of the lead-up stories called The Pitch, which is basically the day that Maitland pitches this proposal to the city, and the city thinks it over, and it's a razor-thin margin what's going to go. In the end, it's actually an unexpected character that sways them that way.
Right,
So
right.
Dredd is certainly supportive, and his name may be on this, and certainly his name will get tied to this in future stories. We've got a story called Soft that just ran that very much does that. Yeah, there's other factors in play as well. The council is slightly, it's this sort of slightly amorphous body that we focus on a bit more than you see in most Dredd stories. We're kind of doing the most council heavy stories of the moment, and we do actually revisit that as well after A Better World. So we are currently working on some stories that really dive down deep into the ramifications of what happened here. So yeah, I guess my answer is you will see.
Yeah, I'm really curious about Chief Judge Logan, because in this story, he comes off looking pretty naive. Like, granted, we don't have any kind of insight into what he is actually thinking. He doesn't get any he doesn't get to do any narration. We don't get to know what he's thinking. You know, there are these multiple coups happening in every single direction. And he goes like, well, you know, we have to try this experiment. We want results. Oh, the experiment didn't work. We clearly were mistaken. I'm very curious about his actual intentions.
Yeah, there's in Soft, we have a story that just ran in 2000 AD, which follows up. But you do get a bit of internal narration with Logan, and I think Logan was kind of, again, into Judge Dredd history, which sort of newer sort of people coming to this fresh might be lost by. But basically, the chief judge is in charge of Mega City 1, in charge of all the judges, and they don't tend to last long. And his predecessor was Judge Hershey, was a very respected, ran as chief judge for a very long time. And she and Dredd effectively put Logan in the position of being in charge. And Logan is not, but he's a very solid leader, but he's not an inspiring leader, I would say. And he knows that himself, but he's not ambitious. And there's a line in Soft where he said, I've got no ambition to be chief judge. And they said, Dredd and Hershey said to him at the time, he said, that's precisely why you're the right person we need right now, because he's essentially, he's a good soul, but he is not, he's not the best tactician, shall we say. And again, those type of characters don't tend to last long in
it's an incredibly cursed position, I think, because it's an incredibly cursed city. You know, the Mega City 1 has a horrifying disaster every few years. It has a complete turmoil on the streets every few years, and chief judges tend not to last long. Hershey, I think, is actually one of the longer runs of a chief judge that we've seen actually on panel. I think it's implied we had some that lasted longer before the comic actually started running in like 79 or whatever. But Hershey was this sort of rock. She fell. Then there was an absence that he filled in, and his instincts are, I think, yeah, administrative rather than power hungry. We've had a few stories with power hungry chief judges as well, and that tends not to go well for them often because of Dredd. But he's,
I mean, we should sorry to interrupt. We should say that like all you need to know to read this book, the judges are a fascist force, and they are overseeing Megacity One, which is the entire eastern seaboard of America after an apocalypse war, and there's a massive wall around Megacity One, keeping all the horrible things out, which is all fairly pertinent for where we are right now in what's going on in the world.
they have a wall to keep Canada out.
Off mic, that's how we started the conversation with Rob as we were waiting for Arthur to come into the room, where it's just like, well, I feel like I'm living in Megacity One right now. Like, I just have this refrain going through my head of like, oh my God, I'm living through another one of history's cautionary tales.
and Dredd has always been that to a degree. Like when you read Dredd in the 80s and 90s, I mean, it was very much like in conversation with, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan and the fascist tendencies that we were experiencing then. And it's not to say like when the 90s came around and you were reading Dredd and we started to get Dredd movies that there weren't horrible parallels going on in that decade. But I think a portion, certainly in America, thought things were on the up and up. Let's not pay attention to the LA riots. Let's not pay attention to our systemically racist prison system. But then you get into where we are now, post 9/11, and for Lisa and I, coming into our own politically, now reading Judge Dredd, it boils the blood and also can lead you into a real dark place.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
but it's I mean, it's like the geniuses who sort of created this strip, where people like John Wagner and Carlos Escoera and Pat Mills and Alan Grant and all those guys, they were just like all good sci-fi. It was like Judge Dredd was predicting the future. A friend of Arthur and I's, Mike Mulcho, you guys know, I'm sure, wrote a very good book last year about how Judge Dredd predicted the future. And maybe, I mean, there is a thing to be said about like for a better world, but like it's kind of the world has caught up with Judge Dredd in a worrying way. It always felt like when you were a kid, Judge Dredd was the future, and now we're reading things, and what's going on in the real world is it's getting a little too close for comfort. There's no the only difference is there's no giant alien-speaking crocodiles currently in the United States called Clegs, but maybe that's to come. There are still certain things Judge Dredd does which is outlandish.
Oh yeah,
yeah. It's happened a couple of times to me that I've written something, and I felt like I'm pushing it out there. This is the kind of response to what's going on now in the world, but I'm taking it further. And then when it's wound round to publication time, stuff starts happening out in the world unrelated to me, just synchronicity, and I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh shit, this is too relevant. I hate this.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime it happens, I guess it's good for readers, but it's like, oh shit, I'm gonna take some sand damage from this.
Well, I mean, again, we should say about this, one of the great things about Dredd is it's always had a sense of humor, and A Better World does too. I mean, it might kick you in the nuts at various points emotionally, but I mean, I think some of my favorite moments in it, at one point, there's a line about a riots, and it says, it goes, by the time the counter protest arrived, things had got out of hand. It said, and then the counter protest arrived. And then he goes, and by the time the counter protest had arrived, and these type of aspects, and we've got like a character in it, the Church of Grudden Guns and things like this, and still has this outlandish kind of comedic. It's sort of black humor, I know, but dark humor, but it's it's in there, and that remains in Judge Dredd.
Yeah, there's a pivotal moment that revolves around a thrown pot of synthy chowder. So, it's Judge Dredd. I mean, that has to be emphasized. It is this sort of semi-comedic satire where everything is in this hyper real, overblown mode.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I find Judge Dredd to be tremendously fun. Uh, but I do also think, when I look back at when I read Judge Dredd when I was young, I think maybe the reason I felt, what if you look back to my last statement, sure, I saw connections to Reagan and Thatcher and blah blah blah, but I was a kid also reading it, so I wasn't as activated as I am now. So of course, it's going to have more political bite. There's going to be a little bit more anger when I'm in my 40s reading Dredd than when I was in my teens.
Did you ever read Judge Dredd America?
Yes, I have it right here.
Yeah, I mean that one's a real pivot point. I think that is one that John Wagner wrote for the Judge Dredd magazine, which was a sort of monthly companion to 2000 AD. It's still going. It sort of tends to be a little bit mature. When they first launched it, they were definitely like, this is the more adult grown-up version. And so he really invested in this story, America, which ended up being an all-time classic. But I think it's also kind of a pivot point in the kind of tone and what you can do with the story. And I don't really mean to compare our story to it directly, because I think, that one's an all-time classic and it would be kind of egotistical to do so. But I think we're definitely trying for that kind of thing.
Yeah, and also one thing we should raise, we've talked a lot about Dredd, and one of the things with A Better World is Henry Flint is not here today, unfortunately, the artist, but I think the art on A Better World is out of this world, and just what Henry did in terms of the storytelling, in terms of from an initial point of view, Arthur and I was sending through the first couple of episodes were like 6-panel pages, and then Henry would just break them down into sort of 14, 15-panel pages sometimes. Every sort of visual acting beat gets its own little panel, and as a result, it's a really kind of extraordinary looking book, and also a really fine example of what you can do with a comics form, I think, which is, and then after a few episodes, once we saw Henry's pages started coming in, we started writing accordingly. And then if you've read the end and the big emotional beat that happens at the end is a direct reflection. The moment Henry's pages started coming in, we kind of went, all right, okay, now we know what to do, how to approach that at the end. So Henry Flint needs a pay rise, is basically.
Like, I'm actually kind of glad he's not here, because I can really lay into how awesome he is as a storyteller and not feel embarrassed. I think he's one of the best sequential storytellers around. And I think A Better World is a prime example of that. And I think, some of that might be due also to the fact that how Judge Dredd stories are published in the magazine. You have these like smaller chunk chapters. But let's go ahead and hit pause on this conversation for just one moment, because we got to pay the bills and hear from our sponsors. Love sci-fi, love horror, love fantasy, love action?
I do.
Then 2000 AD is the greatest comic you're not reading. 2000 AD has a whole universe of characters, from Judge Dredd and Strontium Dog to Rogue Trooper, Shakara Halo Jones, and the poor sods slogging across the cursed earth in the Helltrekkers.
In every weekly issue, you'll get 5 action-packed thrills from incredible creators such as Garth Ennis, Rob Williams, Arthur Wyatt, Henry Flint, Alex DeCampi, Dan Abnett, and many more. Get a print subscription to your door every week, and your first issue is free.
Or subscribe digitally. Get free back issues and download DRM-free copies of each issue for just $9 a month. That's 128 pages of incredible comics every month for less than $10. And all subscribers get amazing offers like money off vouchers and exclusive products.
Head to 2000AD.com and click on subscribe now, or download the 2000AD app and start reading today. Link in the show notes.
So you're looking at A Better World, and you do get pages where there's like 15 panels. And so anytime he then breaks like a pattern, it's extremely effective.
Evocative.
And this book, again, not spoiling anything about the end of it, I don't think I've ever experienced in a 2000 AD comic that panel explosion, that like the way that a splash is used in a better world is one of the best uses of splashes in any 2000 AD book, any comic I've read recently.
Yeah, and prior to that is like we knew like there's a pressure build coming, and that was evident in Henry's style. So we kind of went at some point the pressure has got to go, or has got to release, and so the pages prior to the double page splash you're talking about, which we won't reveal, it's all very very staccato, build, and then you hopefully you turn the page and you get the effect of a double page splash.
Yeah, I mean it's 15 panel grid, but most of the pages are sort of, you know how a grid works. You kind of slice stuff up and you're kind of conjoining panels. So you end up with a high panel count, but it's not necessarily going to be 15 panels every time. The pages leading up are actually like 15, 15, 15, because we're really, bringing all those events together. We start scene shifting in the middle of pages, which is breaking a bit of a comics semi rule there, but like I think it's all in service of the tempo, and by the end it's like I think we almost sort of scene shift every panel in the lead up to that.
And doing something that only comics can really do. I mean,
Yeah.
it's an exemplary comic book moment.
Yeah, and I think again, Henry, he's not here, so we can praise him as much as we want. I mean, I genuinely think he's a bit of a savant when it comes to storytelling. I've sort of
He's very mysterious. We're getting to really build the mystery in his reclusiveness here.
But without a doubt, I think he's one of the best artists who's been working in comics in about the last 20 years. And because he's largely only worked for 2000 AD, the American market seems completely unaware of his work, which is a real tragedy, actually. I think it deserves a bit of a wider... Henry Flint needs his own spot on comics Mount Rushmore.
Our benefit, though, I mean, this story could only have been him. Like we kind of started this storyline way back. We knew it was going to reach a conclusion, and I think very quickly we determined we want to do a big long story, and we need Henry Flint to draw it because he is like the big gun of the moment. He is like pretty much the top Judge Dredd artist of this moment. There's a few that are kind of I'm being horribly mean to all the other artists that I have to work with, but I think most of them would kind of agree. He's kind of leading the sort of Judge Dredd stuff at the moment. There's a few that are also sort of getting up to that level, but he is really nailing it right now. He's like the combined McMahon, Bolland, Bisley, and O'Neill of the moment.
Yeah, he's got a bit of that's the thing. I think if you put sort of Mick McMahon and Kev O'Neill into a blender, you'd probably apart from it'd be a horrible mess, you would end up with Henry Flint coming out the other. It's probably Carlos Escoera as well. It's all good stuff. And I think his art is so in the DNA of 2000 AD. It's like, he's like the next generation.
And again, we talked a little bit about this off mic, but he does not skimp on backgrounds, and so much of the comedy in this comic is also hidden in the backgrounds. So if you blitz through the book, you're gonna miss stuff. You really got to linger.
Yeah, there's signs in the Wyatts in the background. Like I think as we said earlier, like one is we want lies. Some guy is holding up a sign, and it just feels like that's where we are right now in the world, right? It's just and it's it's very megacity, just how split we are as a people, right now, and how sort of like diversified it's all become, largely down to social media and people using social media and weaponizing social media. So that when the riots hit in a better world, the different signs in the background, it's just some people want more judges on the street, some people want less judges on the street, some people just want lies. It's just they're looking for a reason to just kick off and just burn things, basically. Yeah.
And I do think that A Better World is a great gateway into Dredd books. Like you were saying, I think you can pick this up, not know anything about it, and it gives you all the information that you need. I think what's fascinating about this story in particular, when you begin the graphic novel with the pitch and you see Maitland fall onto this revelation that, oh, if we divert funds into education and social services, we will see a drop in crime. We as a reader also know that for Dredd to continue, that can't succeed. So talk about managing the expectations of a new reader, a longtime reader who is aware that Maitland's plan cannot be victorious by the end of this book.
I mean, I think it's a tragedy. That's the nature of this story. I think people are familiar with tragedies. Yeah, things are not going to end well for Hamlet. How are things going to not end well for Hamlet? Is he going to be eaten by ghosts? You don't really know that. So there's still like quite a bit of story there before you find out what happens to him. Maybe he'll go off and join pirates. We don't know. So,
If Shakespeare had worked for 2000 AD, Hamlet would have been eaten by ghosts and possibly robots as well. Carry on.
Way more robot ghost pirate action all throughout Hamlet. But yeah, so we got that going for it. I think we kind of we certainly shift things in such a way that we opened up future stories. I don't think that it's like, oh, nothing can change and this story will be without consequence, because we are doing stuff and we are coming back to it. I think there's kind of a bit of a thing we shift right at the start, really, by doing some violence to that whole premise of this city has to be like this versus this city is chosen to be like this. And I don't think that's going away, and I think that's going to have ramifications in future stories, certainly our future stories, maybe other people's future stories picking up on that. So yeah, I think you can definitely say, okay, this is not going to lead to the outcome where everyone is happy, but it's certainly going to lead to an outcome.
Yeah, and I think there's a storytelling power if you, as the writers, know that it's like if you're telling a story, you make a readership like someone because they're trying to do the right thing. They're essentially sort of an incorruptible person who basically has just gone, no, this is the right thing to do. And then you send them effectively into the haunted house where the axe murderer is there. The reader is kind of going, oh no, the axe murderer is in there somewhere. And I think that's, you're leading the readers down a certain path. I think we kind of felt that we knew the ending going in, so it's kind of it's I think we're in charge of where the narrative's going, and we know there's a power in making a reader care about a character. And
I think we may have known the ending basically right after Carry the Nine, when we did that story, and then we were like, oh shit, there's so much more here, we got to do a big thing. And then the whole arc of it kind of played out from there.
But the thing is, we go back to the initial thing of like Judge Dredd is a cautionary tale. It's like it's hell, the world Dredd lives in is hell on earth. The judges are a fascist force. It is by no circumstance ever is it an idealistic, oh, everything works out well. I think that's kind of implicit in the story.
You should not wear the T-shirt of the 1995 film of it and promote favorite politicians as like Judge Dredd.
Yeah, that would be a fundamental error. And anyone who did that would possibly be a twat. Can we say that?
You can say it. Yeah.
For now, we can say it. You can definitely say it. You don't live here.
That's not going to make much difference. In fact, I was saying to some, because Mr. Musk is plainly a fan of Dredd. The horror, thing is like, what if he buys Rebellion and like, oh, I know, and it's just,
oh my God, Rob, silence yourself.
Oh my God, like that is the scary thing with writing stories like Judge Dredd is there is the danger that the necessary danger that someone will read it and find it aspirational. Where you go like, well, as long as I am the person on the top, if I'm the person on the top, then it really doesn't matter that everything below me is trash. You know what I mean?
Well, there are lots of Judge Dredd readers who probably think that we need more Judge Dredds on the street and just miss the fact that Megacity 1 is an absolute hellscape, and you would never want to live there. It's an awful place. But they've sort of missed that, bless them.
Yeah, there's a John Wagner interview from a while back where he said like when coming up with Judge Dredd, people like to read about villains and people like to read about heroes. And so he's like, why don't we just do both? We'll make a hero villain. And that's Judge Dredd. I think it is possible that for some folks that sort of heroicness, which is an aspect of the character, it's baked in, uh seems more important than the villainousness. Or for some people, the villainous side is the heroic side. They're like, yeah, he's telling it like it is and being a bastard, and that's a good thing. Um, I think that tends to be way more with people who are doing, I'd say, a very light reading. There's kind of a version of Judge Dredd, which is the sort of t-shirt version of Judge Dredd, where he's got the day stick and he's saying, I am the law, and it's very dramatic and exciting, but kind of blunt. And I think it's possible to lean more on the t-shirt side of things than the in-depth version of things. But the way we write it
Potentially,
must be fucking hard to always.
potentially Elon Musk might have gone for that reading of the character.
Right.
I think it's very clearly the 1995 film logo on there.
Like, what keeps me so compelled by Judge Dredd, and I am like, because I'm the most tender-hearted of individuals, is that he is always teetering on the edge of redeemability. Like, it happens in this story. He's in this, there is a moment where there is this potentiality that he could change his mind.
Oh,
Does
no.
that
No.
happen? You don't think so?
I don't think so. I
No,
don't think so.
I'm sorry. I fundamentally disagree with that.
Oh my God.
No, that's your tender heart,
That's
Lisa.
my tender heart. He does go like, okay, well, let's give Maitland's thing a try. He does.
Mhm.
No,
And-
but that's not that wouldn't be redemption for him. I don't think Dredd is ever going to have a road to Damascus moment and go, maybe I've been wrong all these
I'm
years.
not saying that. I'm so
He's
sorry. I'm
Principal
not
Skinner.
saying that
He's
he'll
going,
ever
no, it's the kids
apologize.
who are wrong.
Like, I don't think he'll ever apologize, but I do think he might change his methods. Like, changing his methods. I guess that's different than redeemability, because redeemability sounds like entrance through some kind of pearly gates. That's not what I'm saying.
One of my favorite moments in A Better World is where he goes to Maitland and he has an opportunity to tell her that Hernandez is gunning for her, but then he's like, she knows that. I'm just gonna go.
Yeah, but the same thing happens in reverse too, where Maitland goes like, before she tells Dredd, like, oh, this is what I've discovered in the numbers, where she chooses to withhold that information from him. They're both doing this math of, I know this person's character and I know how I want this person to operate, and they're both very operational, and so they're not making decisions from emotionality. They're making decisions from like, well, what can I say in this conversation that will bring about an outcome that maintains like my personal view of the status quo.
Yeah, they're both hugely results driven. That's kind of one of the interesting things about this story is there's been stories in 2000 AD about the sort of democracy movement and sort of attempts by the citizens to get out from under the thumb of this regime. And, certainly some of the rioters are waving sort of pro-democrat flags and sort of calling for a return to democracy. Maitland isn't actually advocating for any of that. She's advocating for a resource reallocation that favors a better outcome. And she can just see that in the numbers, and it drives her mad that other people don't see that in the numbers and see it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, she's very myopic in her way, and Dredd is very myopic in his own way, and neither of them are particularly great communicators. As as a result, there's probably, if they sat down and had a chat, there's probably a lot of things. But Dredd's, you're lucky to get more than 3 words out of Dredd at the best of times. He is the ultimate sort of stoic, sort of figure of sort of anger and repression, basically. But in there somewhere, I think, as we said earlier, I think he realizes Maitland might be onto something. As Arthur says, Maitland is still saying, look, we're still going to have judges, and we're still going to be implementing the law. Then we're not saying we all sort of we change the entire system. But of course, it's weaponized by people like sort of our media mogul Robert Glenn to go, the judges are they're going to get you all killed. The judges don't care anymore. You're going to have to go out, and
Yeah,
suddenly,
there's an entirely separate John Glenn version of what Maitland is like shows up at one point, who's sort of a huge bleeding heart and generally just sort of wanting to give flowers to rampaging cyber mutants before they chainsaw everyone to death. And I'm not saying that's what happens with our media pretty much all the time, but there's a lot of that. We've seen a lot of that in the last few years.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like from our point of view here in the States that and within the comic book world, the Wednesday Warrior world, there was a large reaction to a better world. It seems like more people who don't even read Judge Dredd did find a copy of this particular story in their hands. Does that feel accurate to you? Do you feel like more people have responded positively towards a better world than other Dredd stories you've written?
It's certainly had a big impact. It seems to have gone over well. I heard this morning that I think it was Gosh Comics in the UK have it's like their fastest selling Judge
no,
Dredd graphic
it was
novel.
OK Comics,
Okay,
were
Comics.
the retailers. They said it's their fastest selling Dredd graphic novel they've ever had. And then a friend told me Gosh Comics had sold out.
Wow.
But it's like, and it ended up on a few best of year lists, which was great. But it's like, and we know full well it's very difficult to make a dent in the American market with Judge Dredd. It's kind of like it's not sort of, it doesn't have the same sort of profile as Marvel and DC kind of work or whatever, But I mean, I think at the end of the day, this is just like when I've had it a few times before with a couple of other Judge Dredd stories of mine. Every now and again, you will have one which sort of breaks through and sort of people. And this had an emotional hit. Just the quality of the storytelling, I think, which again is like, Henry's work in it. It's all like it's a bunch of different things all coming together at the same time, really. And politically, zeitgeist wise, a lot of the issues as we've been talking about are very, very relevant for right now, which is sad in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's depressing.
Yeah. So we've depressed people. Good. Excellent.
But I also feel like I think the ultimate appeal of Dredd is that connectivity to the world around us. It's fun, it's got humor, it's got a lot of bite. Mostly it has relatability. It is science fiction that is speaking to the present, and that's why we keep Dredd around.
Yeah, he's a straight man. He doesn't say much, and he one of the geniuses of the strip over like 47 years is he reflects. Judge Dredd reflects a lot of the world around us, and while he just goes around sort of smashing people across the face with a day stick and shooting people, he's just good, clean fun.
Yeah. I did not want to end this conversation without talking about one moment that happens in the hard way. Because you can only deploy this line once or twice, every few years. You do get Dredd to say "I am the law" in a fantastic way, encouraging the mechanismos to return to their proper state. He gives a speech. He says, "I'm the law. I am the law." What is it like bringing that into the comic? And why bring that into the comic?
Oh, that's just a fun thing to do, because like we've all grown up with, every now and again, like you said, you can't do it too often, but every now and again, Dredd needs to say, "I am the law," and that was like we gave a bunch of space to Jake Lynch, the artist, on that one. We knew, we wanted him to have a big moment, because in the story, a bunch of sort of robot judges are being reprogrammed for evil, effectively, and Dredd's weaponless. And he just stands out in front of them and he just tells them, "Look, you used to be judged. You're judges, even though you're robots. You look deep down in your programming, and what you'll hear is my voice. And you are meant to follow the law, and I am the fucking law."
I mean, it's specifically Dredd's voice in the case of the Mechanismos. I think they kind of did a lot of programming based on him in the I think in the early stories, it was like, yeah, we have basically fed the comportment of Judge Dredd into this robot and set it loose on the world. And that doesn't go too well, and they make tweaks to it. But like, they're still at root, I think, have a lot of dread in them. So when he says that, that's going to reflect back and forth with them.
Is there a conversation with editorial like, yeah, we're going to use it this time?
No, you get to play your Joker like once every 3 years. Can we play it now?
Yeah.
No, I think it was just, yeah. But I think you just know inherently you can't do that. If you did that every week, it was like, but every once every couple of years, you could need a good, healthy I am the law. And who among us would not benefit from just going into our local corner shop and telling the person behind the counter to hand over something and I am the law.
Yeah.
It's not used lightly.
It's not used lightly.
It resonates later when he's reflecting on the results of Section 304 and going like, but even if the results are good, they might still be unlawful. That is the moment of cognitive dissonance, like to me.
Yes. But I think this is one of the key things, I think, again, with Dredd is the fact that he's a man. He's a human being. He's not a robot. And he's, so basically there's flaws in there. And sometimes he doesn't quite, cognitive dissonance will occur with Dredd sometimes. He doesn't always get it right. And, I think that's one of the things that makes the character so interesting because, if he was just a robotic kind of like coming out with these catchphrases, it would kind of be a fun strip, but the character itself wouldn't have survived 47 years and all the little.
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite stretches on Dredd, and this is kind of a long stretch, but like John Wagner, who's kind of the primary writer, put together a series of stories starting with Origins, which is like Judge Dredd exploring, where he's from, through to this story called Tour of Duty, which is where he kind of ends up sort of out of the political mainstream, the city and in the wilderness a little, and then Day of Chaos, which is this amazing story, again, Henry Flint throughout, which is basically the city, the judges, and Dredd to extent fucked up majorly. Everything goes to shit, and a lot of people die, and it's one of those big disasters that form the background to our story. And you just see everything fall apart in this story, and it's not a story where there's a last minute save or a last minute win, and that makes it super powerful. Yeah, then that kind of bounces back with Trifecta and like a bunch of other stories that bring us up to the status quo. But like that sort of run of stories, especially Day of Chaos, really does question what's going on with him, and does really benefit from him not being quite perfect and not quite a rock.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for hanging out and talking Judge Dredd: A Better World with us today. The book is out now everywhere. Run to your shop, pick it up, and enjoy it the way that you want to enjoy it.
Unless you're a fascist.
Unless you're a fascist. Or you're Elon Musk. Don't enjoy it.
You just get Stallone.
But no, thanks a lot for having us, guys, and thanks for talking it through. We appreciate it.
It's a delight.
Yeah, really good chat.
And there you have it. Once again, Judge Dredd: A Better World is out now in paperback and hardcover from 2000 AD. You can find a link to it in the show notes. Go support one of our sponsors, Lisa. My favorite moment in that entire conversation is when you start to discuss the concept that Judge Dredd may be redeemable.
And I backpedal immediately, right away.
As we all jump on you.
Well, so I agree, it is not in his character to say that he was wrong and really feel terrible. But I do sincerely think that his programming that he has, your job is to reduce crime. That is what he's been told.
To follow the law. And he is the law. He's a servant of the law. He's a physical embodiment of the law.
So if the law were to change and the methods were to change, he would indeed change. I believe that order of command is used to cover up all manner of sins. And I think that if I were God or whatever, and they're like, it's on you to condemn Judge Dredd because he's killed all of these people, I don't know if I could do it. You know what I mean? But Judge Dredd is a tool used by the system. And if that tool was used differently, it could be used for the greater good. And I am saying that that is, no matter what Rob or Arthur say, I think that Brad, that is the thesis statement of this story.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. I do think it definitely comes from your tender heart. I think what Rob and Arthur are exploring currently with 2000 AD and Judge Dredd stories is rather radical, and that notion is Megacity 1 is not something that we have necessarily been condemned to. It's actually something that we want, and we get what we crave. We want lies.
We want law and order.
We want law and order. We are all responsible. We, the citizens of Megacity 1, the citizens of America, are responsible for the city we have. And do we actually crave change?
Or do we actually, is the function of law and order to actually get rid of crime? I think, we compare Judge Dredd's ends to Maitland's ends, and they're the same, right? They want to get rid of crime. But if you go back to the Chief Justice, and even the Chief Justice, the naive Chief Justice goes we could end crime. Let's do this thing. But if you watch their actual actions, abolishing crime is not their end, and I think that that's where the danger is.
Yeah, and that's what I was just saying. Are we seeking change, or are we just living in the world that we actually want? Yeah. That's what's being explored right now through Arthur and Rob's interpretation of Megacity 1.
But the point that I'm trying to make is that we needed to look to our actions and the outcome of our actions and reverse engineer what we actually want. If you were to reverse engineer the outcomes of law and order in the context of Megacity 1, they don't want to abolish crime. They just want a way to systematically execute poor people, and this is the way that they do it. So, they don't actually believe in law and order. They actually just hate poor people.
And love their position of power. They love their ranking. They want to maintain their ranking, maybe possibly go upwards, climb it, but definitely not go downwards, and maybe also just keep pushing those people further away from their ranking.
And I think that that's where we are now in our dystopian present, where there is this kind of pushing away or the further oppression of individuals to empower the very few. And it's not on the system to say what its ends are. They leave it to the fringy media to say the quiet part loud, to rally the weirdos. And empower the weirdos.
But at least Megacity 1
is fictional.
Has alligator people, right?
Oh, yeah.
There's some fun in Megacity 1, and boy, finding the fun here on planet Earth, our planet Earth, is challenging. But I guess that fun is in comics, in entertainments like Judge Dredd. And if the opposition is going to have its fringy weirdo media, we need its response. And that is Judge Dredd. That is 2000 AD.
So that was another conversation for the books. We really appreciate Rob and Arthur suffering us and our opinions about Megacity 1 and living in it. So what do we have coming up next week?
So, Lisa, we're going to do 2 episodes next week. We told you already that Matthew Rosenberg was joining Comic Book Couples Counseling for the first time to discuss his new Image Comics series, We're Taking Everyone Down With Us. That is an excellent conversation. But now we also have a surprise bonus episode with Stan Sakai.
Yay!
He is back on the podcast talking about Usagi Yojimbo 10,000 Plums, which is an especially personal tale for Stan. And I was honored to get into those reasons with him.
Yeah.
It's a lovely conversation that Lisa and I have. And we're also going to be able to reveal some exclusive art from issue 2 of 10,000 Plums, which is a first for Comic Book Couples Counseling.
Then on the Patreon, we are gallivanting through the green. It may feel like we're trudging through the green because we're a little late on this episode. Life got in the way. But for those of you who haven't jumped in yet, maybe it's good news because you still have time to catch up to issue 21. And then we're going to double down and we're going to do 2 gallivantings in a row to make it up to those loyal people who have been putting in their comments and doing the work. We're really
doing a
them.
lot on the Patreon right now. So we've got the Swamp Thing podcast and Gallivanting Through the Green. We also have our Married to Singles episodes. We have a conversation with Michael Schwartz all about Darkhold Iron Man, one of his all-time favorite single issues. And in that thread, we're going to have a conversation with Sarah Meyer about the Darkwing Duck series, The Duck Knight Strikes Again.
How freaking fun.
That is so cool.
And
Sarah
so
Meyer
Sarah.
is a genius. You should be reading their Saturday Morning Adventures Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle series, and you should have already read their monstrous memoir. And then we have our Support Your Local Comic Shop Patreon podcast series, where we're talking to rad retailers about what it's like to sling comics in 2025. And we just had a conversation with Zach and Aaron from Now or Never Comics in San Diego, and we have a conversation coming up with Patrick Brower from Challengers in Chicago. So we've got a lot going on. There's a lot to find over in that Patreon feed.
It's fun to like do our plugs and be like a little bit defensive. Also, we are making comics that you can buy. You can support.
Oh my God, yes.
This Ink Runs Cold. Short stories from the space-time continuum, now up on Kickstarter. It features our short comic, The ADHD PI, illustrated by Scott Morse and colored brilliantly by Jose Villarrubia.
Yeah, and you can actually read our page on the Kickstarter. They're using it as part of the advertisement campaign, which at first I was like, oh, don't spoil our page. But, if you're going to get this book, you're not going to get this book because of Brad and Lisa. You're going to get this book because Stan Sakai's in it, Brian Michael Bendis is in it, Mike Allred's in it, Scotty Young's in it, Matt Wagner's in it. It's 96 pages, all illustrated by Scott Morris with 89 other writers contributing.
Do you know what is also fun?
What?
Well, Brad, you know.
What?
But the listeners, do you guys know what is also fun?
What?
Is that if you support the Kickstarter and order a physical copy, you can pick it up at San Diego Comic-Con and go Halloween style trick-or-treating, getting all of those cool creators to sign your copy of this Ink Run Cold. And then you can try to find Brad and Lisa just floating around San Diego and we can sign it too. Wouldn't that be wild?
Yeah, just message us on Twitter. Or
Yeah,
not Twitter, Blue Sky.
Yeah.
San Diego Comic-Con is going to be a big con for us for a lot of reasons, and the biggest reason is probably our contribution to This Ink Runs Cold. It has already reached its funding goal, so this book is happening. Just don't miss out on it.
Yeah. Stretch. Could you understand that I said the word stretch? Stretch.
I can't
stretch.
now, Lisa.
Okay, Brad, I actually have to go clock in. I have 3 things on my work to-do list today. Judge, jury, and executioner. Where can our listeners send their words of affirmation to you?
You can find me on most social medias at Mouthdork, although I'm hanging out on Blue Sky mostly these days. If you have words of affirmation for our logo, send them to Jesse Lonergan at Jesse Lonergan on Blue Sky or on Instagram, Jesse.Lonergan. Lisa, where can our listeners send their words of affirmation to you?
I'm always accepting words of affirmation at Sidewalk Siren on some social medias. If you'd like to spend more quality time with us, you can subscribe to us on Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, Audible, Apple Podcasts, or whatever app you choose. We're everywhere. If you'd like to get exclusive, you can join our Patreon, where you'll get more content, including weekly bonus episodes.
If you'd like to reach out and touch us electronically, you can email the podcast, cbccpodcast@gmail.com. You can visit our website, comicbookcouplescounseling.com, or follow us on all the socials at CBCC Podcast.
If you'd like us to touch you physically, You can wear our merch.
Oh.
tpublic.com/stores/comic book couples counseling divided by hyphens.
You can give us the gift of 5 stars on Audible or Apple Podcasts. And if you'd like to do an act of service, why not write a review or leave a comment on the show while you're there?
We are fluent and receptive in all 5 love languages. It really warms our hearts and helps the pod.
So until next time, friends, keep your love tank full.
And your psychic rapport open.
Doopy doopy bum 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 ba.
The most obvious one being like, it's supposed to be a cautionary tale. Like, you know, you're supposed to be able to like watch a zombie film and go like, well, we can't let it become this. Watch I Am Legend, for example, and go like, okay, it's on us to not let this happen. But
That's
like,
a vampire film.
yeah. Go fuck.
Woo!
Yeah, I mean, you can leave that in.
Like, it depends on which adaptation of I Am Legend, but the Richard Matheson original, Lisa, that is a vampire Armageddon situation.
You are an exhausting person, and this is beside the point.
This is the stinger.